Welcome to Sola Church Online.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Alan Rigg. This is my wife, Miranda Landers, and we are weeks away from launching Sola Church in Santa Monica. To learn more, go to solachurch.life. There you can RSVP for upcoming launch team events, as well as plan your visit for Launch Sunday.
And we want to wish all of you a very happy new year. And there is no way to start 2022 like with our church family.
That's
So
right.
let's worship.
This is what heaven sounds like. We praise you, we praise you. This is what living looks like. This is what freedom feels like. This is what heaven sounds like. We praise you, we praise you. This is what living looks like. This is what freedom feels like. This is what heaven sounds like. We praise you, we praise you. We'll see you break down every wall. We'll watch the giants fall. You cannot survive when we praise you. The God of breakthroughs on our side, forever lifted high. With all creation cry, God, we praise you. We'll see you break down every wall. We'll watch the giants fall. You cannot survive when we praise you. The God of breakthroughs on bless you and keep you, make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. The Lord bless you and keep you, make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. Amen. Amen. The Lord bless you and keep you, make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you He is with you in the
This is that time in our service when we worship with our giving. If you're just checking us out today, please don't feel obligated to give. But if Sola Church is your church home, or if you just want to help us launch a life-giving church in Santa Monica, California, it's super easy to make a tax-deductible donation.
The easiest way is to look for the link in your chat feed, but you can also go to solachurch.life and click Give.
Yeah, and this is the first Sunday of the year, so thanks in advance for helping us start strong.
And today we start the rest of a message that you started last week.
Yeah, that's right. This message was taped live at Grace Church in Amarillo, Texas about 3 years ago. And I just thought it was perfect for the new year because it's all about navigating change in our lives. So, yeah.
Let's roll part 2.
Well, we've talked about Daniel at the food court. Let's talk about Daniel in a food fight. This is going to be fun. Verse 8. But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the chief of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Now God had brought Daniel into the favor and goodwill of the chief of the eunuchs. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who has appointed your food and drink. For why should he see your faces looking worse than the young men who are your age? Then you would endanger my head before the king. So Daniel said to the steward, whom the chief of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days, and let them give us vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance be examined before you, and the appearance of the young men who eat the portion of the king's delicacies. And as you see fit, so deal with your servants. So he consented with them in this matter and tested them 10 days. Now, have you guys ever been in a food fight? I mean a real food fight, not like at the dinner table with your siblings. I mean like in a public place with strangers. I've been in one of those. It was middle school. We called it junior high back in the day. But middle school, I'm in the cafeteria, me and my buddies. We've locked down this table. This is our table. Every table is filled. The roar of conversation is filling the cafeteria. I can barely hear my friend talking to me from across the table. But we heard this. We heard somebody go like this. Food fight. The next thing you know, visibility dropped to 0. You guys have heard of the food pyramid? We built it. Right there in the cafeteria, we built a full-on life-size food pyramid. It was unbelievable. And to continue the story, first of all, I just have to apologize in advance. I'm about to tell you something about me so immature, so inappropriate. I was in middle school. You guys got to show me a little grace. You know what? You know what I did, me and my friends? We used to make fun of the assistant principal because, we called him Link. And that was short for the missing link. And we called him that because he had this forehead that wouldn't stop. It was unbelievable, this forehead. Like he was born with a visor as the original equipment. It was unbelievable. And so we were so immature, we called him Link. So right in the middle of this food fight, Link walks in to break things up. And I see somebody launch a milkshake. So here's this styrofoam cup spinning through the air. I mean, it's such a tight spiral, that frozen treat staying packed in there till it hits Link in the head. And then that chocolate milkshake, we just watch it running right off the end of that pale forehead. It was awesome. I mean, I don't remember much from that year, but I so remember that. That was an academic highlight. So here's Daniel. I mean, he and his buddies are in the food court. The people around them are downing the delicacies. They're washing it down with wine. And Daniel, of all people, puts his hands to his mouth and yells, "Food fight!" Why would Daniel want to fight about food? Well, notice in verse 8, 2 references to defilement. The word defiled appears there twice. Remember the to-eat list and the not-to-eat list? It's possible that they were served some things that were on the not-to-eat list. Served things that weren't kosher, as we might say. It's also possible that some of the things they were served, even likely that some of the things they were served, the meat in particular, had been dedicated to idols. If you're a student of the New Testament, you know that the first Christians struggled with this. Some of them lived in parts of the world, parts of the Roman Empire, where you couldn't buy meat that had not been dedicated to an idol. And so they really wrestled as a matter of faith and conviction with whether it was okay to eat that or not. And if it was okay for them but not for someone else, whether it was okay to eat that in front of them. And, this was a serious thing that these first Christians struggled with. So we know that from reading the New Testament, but what you may not realize is that that didn't begin in New Testament times. It was going on in Old Testament times. It's carried over. So it was probably an issue for Daniel and his friends. Paul, of course, does deal with this issue in the New Testament. He says it's all about conscience. He describes two kinds, a strong one and a weak one. It would be a mistake to think that strong conscience is a compliment necessarily, or to think that weak conscience is a criticism necessarily. It's not. They're just descriptors. A strong conscience is one that is less sensitive. It's like a smoke detector in your house that has a much higher threshold. Like you would have to build a campfire underneath it, to get it to go off. A weak conscience is a more sensitive conscience. It's like a smoke detector with a much lower threshold, like you even think about blowing out the candles in a birthday cake, and it goes off in the other end of the house. So as we think about conscience, well, a strong conscience looks at gray and sees white. A weak conscience looks at gray and sees black. Paul says in Romans 14, verse 23, he who doubts is condemned if he eats, because he does not eat from faith. For whatever is not from faith is sin. So Paul wanted us to be sensitive to conscience, our own conscience, but also the conscience of other people. There's a lot of talk today about what it means or doesn't mean to stumble people. I'd like to weigh in really quick. If you do something that I don't like, you didn't stumble me. If you do something that annoys me or irritates me, you didn't stumble me. But if I do something that you don't have the freedom to do, and because I do it, you revisit it. You feel conflicted, and you start to rehearse in your mind all the reasons why you aren't doing it and reasons why maybe you could or should do it, and you end up doing that thing, and immediately you're convicted. Immediately you feel a rush of guilt, a rush of regret, a rush of remorse. Now I've stumbled you. So there's this tension here, because what I would want to say is this, that it, on the one hand, we can never allow an intolerant minority to hijack the culture of an entire community of faith, like a local church. On the other hand, we want to live in such a way that we make it easier and not harder for the people around us to follow their conscience, right? So there has to be this sweet spot in the middle, man, where we're walking in love and showing each other lots and lots of grace. But putting ourselves back in the place of these young men, all you can eat buffet. Woo, it seems like a small thing, right? If I'm them, I'm thinking, man, this is great, and it's not that big of a deal, is it? Why not cut a corner? Why not take a shortcut? Did I ask to be here? Did I ask to be abducted and taken from my home and from my country and dropped into this strange place? Did I ask to be put in this seemingly competitive situation where I don't know what's going to happen if I don't come out on top? Are they going to kill me? I don't know what's going to happen. And I'm hungry. I need to eat. When in Babylon, do as the Babylonians do. Isn't this the way we often think about these kinds of things? Why not cheat a little to get ahead? But not Daniel. Notice in verse 8 it says that he purposed in his heart. He had a purposeful heart. Or to put it another way, he had heartfelt purpose. What is yours? I want to talk for just a moment about this relationship between being and doing. Being the person who's God's called us to be, doing the things that we think God's called us to do, or maybe just the things that we want to do. I want to talk about the relationship between these things. What I've noticed is that for those of us that are all about doing before being, for those of us that it's all about achieving, it's all about accomplishing, it's all about accumulating, we are more susceptible to the temptation to cut corners, to take shortcuts. Whereas over here, for those of us that put being first, we're more interested in and more concerned about, becoming the man, the woman that God's called us to be, to grow spiritually, to have character, to have integrity. We're going to be way less susceptible to the temptation to cut corners, to take shortcuts. Here's what else I've learned. That over here, If we are doers first, here's the lie we tell ourselves. We tell ourselves that we're beers at heart. We're going to get around to being. As soon as I close this deal, as soon as I get that promotion, as soon as I flip this house, as soon as I marry this person, as soon as I do this or that or the other thing, then I'm going to give my full attention to my spiritual growth, to my personal development, to my relationship with God, and we don't ever get to it. But over here, people who put being first, people who say, you know what, the first thing I'm going to do is focus on my relationship with God, on character, on integrity, on growth. More often than not, when we're in this place, the doing follows. The doing goes hand in hand with it. How much better to put being before doing. That's what Daniel did. Now, I love that Daniel didn't just refuse to eat. He could have been like a toddler in the high chair, like, They're trying to feed him, in Babylon, And they're all trying to get him to take the, and worse, maybe, the kid takes the food in their mouth and spits it back in your face. Ooh, not good at all. Daniel wasn't like that. I mean, he had a suggestion that was shot down. And I love that he didn't give up when he got shot down. When the chief eunuch said he couldn't help him, he suggested an alternative to the steward. I love Daniel's approach to problem solving. You've heard that saying, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem, right? The truth is, anybody can point out a problem, and most people do. Few people will offer a solution, and even fewer will take ownership of it. One thing I discovered, 18 years leading Calvary Austin, I mean, seriously, if I had $1 for every time someone approached me in the lobby to tell me what was wrong, what wasn't good enough, what we needed to start, what we needed to build, what we needed to grow, this, that, the other thing, I would never have to work another day in my life. But it was a real small subset of those people who actually had a well thought out solution to the problem. And there was an even smaller subset of that group that had any intention of rolling up their sleeves and doing it themselves. It was always an idea for what somebody else needed to do, what somebody else needed to pay for, what somebody else needed to make happen. Man, I love that Daniel didn't take that approach. I mean, listen to this. Do you want to excel? Do you want to excel at work? Do you want to excel at school? Do you want to excel right here in your local church? Do you want to distinguish yourself at home with the people who know you best and love you most? Be a problem solver, not a problem spotter. Daniel models that for us. Now, before we move on to our third point, as we observe that this diet was a vegetarian diet, I must say, I've discovered that there are two kinds of people in the world. There are veggie lovers and there are veggie haters. I'm a veggie lover. Any other veggie lovers here this morning? Yeah, look at that. Look at all that veggie love out there. Any veggie haters? Yeah, so you guys can barely lift your hand over your head because you're malnourished. You don't have enough vitamins. And man, I love vegetables. And you're a veggie lover when you love veggies that other veggie lovers hate. Did you follow that? Like, how about artichoke hearts? Oh, yeah. How about Brussels sprouts? Come on now, other things that somebody on a vegetarian diet might eat. Like, how about hominy? I'm down with the hominy, man. Bring it on. How about the lima beans? It doesn't hurt to smother them in butter and a little salt. Oh, so good, but I love it. Now, even though I love veggies, nobody's ever accused me of being a vegetarian. I love my meat. Man, I love my meat. I mean, when I was pastoring in Austin, we had a favorite barbecue restaurant in Austin, Texas. It's called Pokey Joe's Smokehouse. And they had my favorite restaurant t-shirt that I've ever seen. You know what it said? It said, vegetarian is Indian for can't hunt. That's how we roll in Texas, right? Proud to live in Austin for 24 years. That's how we roll here in this state. I've got a pastor friend who says that if God didn't mean for us to eat animals, he wouldn't have made them out of steak. Seems like a philosophy to live by to me. But my point as we transition is just that it's okay to be a vegetarian. It's okay to be a vegan. It's okay not to be, those kinds of things. That's not the point. Like, that's not the reason why Daniel ate the way he ate. We've talked about the reasons why he ate the way he ate. So there's room for all of us to approach food any way we want to. Daniel at the food court in a food fight. And finally, Daniel with food for thought. Verse 15. At the end of 10 days, their features appeared better and fatter in flesh than all the young men who ate the portion of the king's delicacies. Thus the steward took away their portion of delicacies and the wine that they were to drink and gave them vegetables. As for these 4 young men, God gave them knowledge and skill in all literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. Now, this is like a competitive eating situation. You ever like channel surfing and stumble on competitive eating? And it's on the sports network. Like, when did eating become a sport? If you've ever seen anything about competitive eating, you know the name Joey Chestnut. Joey is hands down the most, well-known of the competitive eaters. I mean, this guy is pulling down $200,000 a year, shoving hot dogs and hot wings down his throat. When you were the starving teenager, had you known that you could make $200,000 a year eating like that, it could have changed your life. You might have skipped college and posted up at Luby's, man, to build your skill set. Get ready, right? So these guys, they're in this competitive eating situation, and they win, and they do it on a vegetarian diet. But before you run to Whole Foods or Trader Joe's or wherever you like to get your produce, notice the fine print on the diet. It says, fatter in flesh. Now, I'm no marketing genius. I don't have a degree in advertising. But I'm just thinking that's a really bad way to market your diet. Like, I don't think there's any danger at all that Atkins, South Beach, Weight Watchers are going to steal fatter in flesh for their tagline in 2019. I mean, it's exactly because I pack on the weight in the road that I'm counting points right now. And most of the time, counting points and thinking about what I eat. But this obviously has less to do with one's gut and more to do with one's God. So let's bring it in for a second. Think about this. From a purely pragmatic standpoint, life with God works in a way that life without Him doesn't. Let me say it again. Life with God works in a way that life without Him doesn't. So, what part of your life isn't working? And in what way is that part of your life out of alignment with God? For a season, when I was pastoring in Austin, there was a season where my sister lived there too, she and her family. She drove a van, and she was telling me about some problems that she was having in terms of handling, and I knew right away that it sounded like she needed a front-end alignment. She asked me if I would go with her to see the mechanic, which I agreed to do, and as we described to him what she was experiencing, he said the same thing, sounds like a front-end alignment. And then he asked us to wait while he pulled up her records in the computer because she'd been there before. So he pulls up her records, and first thing he says is, "Oh, we told you the last time you were here that you needed a front-end alignment." Now here's what's never happened in the history of driving. No one with a car out of alignment has ever been driving down the road and hit a pothole, boom, and then been like, "Hey, we're back in alignment. Check it out." Like, that's never happened. No one has ever driven their car back into alignment. And no one has ever lived their life back into alignment either. If your car needs an alignment, you're going to have to take it to the shop. And if our lives need an alignment, we're going to have to be intentional. We're going to have to be deliberate. We're going to have to be proactive. What part of your life is out of alignment with God? Read the Bible to see what God says in His Word about that part of your life. Pray and ask God to speak to you about that part of your life. Find a wise person who's following Christ, who's a little further down the road than you are, and ask them about how they've had such victory in that part of their life. That's what we've got to do. That's what's got to happen. Now, picking it up in verse 18. Now, at the end of the days when the king had said that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. And then the king interviewed them, and among them all none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore they served before the king. And in all matters of wisdom and understanding about which the king examined them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers who were in all his realm. Thus Daniel continued until the first year of King Cyrus. So it's test time. Everything's been leading up to this. I hate tests. I mean, remember earlier I was asking you to think back to when you were in school and getting a yearbook. Didn't you hate test taking? There were the pop quizzes, the midterms, the finals. They gave us written tests. They gave us oral tests. We had fill-in-the-blank tests, multiple choice tests, true-false tests, yes-no tests. I mean, how many of you break into a cold sweat when you hear the words, now take out your Scantron form and your number 2 pencil? It's like, no, I don't want to be back in that place. I don't want to fill in little circles on one of those Scantron forms. These guys, 3 years later, it's an oral exam before Nebuchadnezzar himself. How scary must that have been? But they aced it. They aced it. Now notice in verse 21 it says, Daniel continued. I love that. If we continued to read the book of Daniel, we would discover that their story didn't end in the food court. For Daniel's friends, there would be a fiery furnace in chapter 3. For Daniel, there would be a lion's den in chapter 6. The truth is, more often than not, the tests get harder, don't they? We overcome one thing and we think that's it, and then there's another thing. There's another disruption. There's another relocation. And maybe it's even harder than the one before it. It's an interesting thing because so many people think that a life of faith is an easy life in the sense that it's kind of like giving in. It's kind of like rolling over. It's kind of like, settling or something. Like you hear people say things like, well, religion is a crutch. And we're like, Christianity's no crutch. Christianity is like a triage, man. It's like the emergency room. It's like the ICU. It's the NICU. It's the whole thing. But make no mistake about it, following Christ is not for the faint of heart. The tests and the temptations are great and greater far when following Christ than when not following Christ. So as we think about that, as we think about this story, do you think that Daniel's friends ever could have been prepared for the fiery furnace had it not been for the food court? Do you think that Daniel ever could have been prepared for the lion's den if not for the food court? If you're in a food court right now and you're hating life and you might not even be happy with God right now and you are just feeling so many things and struggling maybe even to sort them all out, if you knew that down the road for you was a fiery furnace, could you be thankful for the food court? If you knew that down the road for you was a lion's den, could you be thankful for the food court? Right here in the food court, Jesus is telling you how strong you are with him inside you. He's telling you that we've got this. He's preparing us for those things that still lie ahead. Knowing that one of those things is in your future might change everything about how you feel sitting in your seat in this second service at Grace Church in Amarillo today. May God speak to our hearts about that along those lines. In the very same situation that God is testing us, Satan is tempting us. And we talked before about how easy it is to minimize sin when we're being tempted. If we were these boys in this food court, we'd be like, man, it's just a little thing. Like this food, this drink, it's not a big it's a little tiny harmless thing. It's not a big thing that's going to crush me or ruin everything. It's just this little nothing thing. Isn't that the way we talk to ourselves? Aren't those the lies we tell ourselves? Now, I bet you think you know what I'm going to say right now. I bet you're waiting for me to say that everyone who compromises in small things goes on to compromise in big things, except I'm not going to say that because that's not always true. But here's what I am going to say. Everyone who compromises in big things compromised in small things first. I know by experience. My biggest mistakes, my greatest failures, and I've had some big ones, were always preceded by smaller compromises first. And you know it by experience too, don't you? Isn't it true that your biggest failures were preceded by smaller compromises first? So maybe we could say then, this morning, maybe we could agree together that the small stuff matters. Or maybe we should scratch that all together and say that there is no small stuff. It's all big stuff. It all matters. It all counts to God and should to us. And so the truth is that it's right here, it's right now in the food court that our attitudes are being developed, our habits are being formed, the decisions that we're making now, rather than having nothing to do with what will come later, have everything to do with what will come later. But in the midst of all of that, it says again, Daniel continued, Dan the man, he would outlast Nebuchadnezzar. He would outlast the whole Babylonian Empire. 3 times in this book, he's called greatly beloved. Twice in Ezra, he's mentioned alongside Noah and Job, heady company. Jesus calls him Daniel the prophet, as recorded in both Matthew and Mark. Wow. Daniel at the food court, in a food fight, with food for thought. So here's the thing. See, like this week, you may go back and look at this chapter again. You may want to go back and revisit it. Reading it from the beginning, knowing what we know now. You know what I think might pop out? I think what might pop out are things like this. Phrases like verse 2, Lord gave. Verse 9, God brought. Verse 17, God gave. It's not that God showed up at the end of this thing. It's that God was present from the beginning of this thing. His fingerprints are all over it, and his fingerprints are all over you. Are you in the food court this morning? As you sit in the food court struggling with whatever disruptive change has been introduced in your life, I want you to stop and look around. Can you see God's fingerprints on the napkin dispenser? Can you see his fingerprints on the flatware? On the back of your seat, he slid it into place. On the light switch, on the door handle, God hasn't forgotten about you. Not one thing about your situation has escaped his attention. He's with you now in the food court, whispering in your ear as he wraps his arms around you from behind how much he loves you, how strong you are with him in your life, how together you've got this. We've got this.
And now it's time to fill out a connection card.
Yeah, you should see a link there in the chat feed. This is your way of letting us know that you attended online today. It's also where you can let us know if you'd like to participate in one of our virtual small groups.
And Alan, how are things looking for launch day?
That's a great question. You know, we don't have a contract yet for Olympic High School, where we're tentatively scheduled to launch on January 23rd. And there are rumblings about the potential for an interruption to in-person school if the Omicron surge continues. So, I mean, there were 20,000 new cases today. We're taping on Thursday in LA County, and it's not expected to peak until late January. So we're monitoring the situation closely. We're making contingency plans, and we may need to push our launch day back by just a few weeks.
The best way to stay up to date is to RSVP for Launch Sunday. You can do that by going to our website, solachurch.life, and that way you'll be sure to be made aware of any changes that may be coming available. And we hope that everyone has a great week, and we will see you next time.
Bye, everybody.